Stephanie is originally from Wellington in the Western Cape, where she matriculated. She went on to complete 2 degrees at the University of Stellenbosch, and she obtained a PhD from Rhodes University. She lives on a small hobby farm with her life partner, a policeman. And here, they live a sustainable life, raising livestock, planting veggies and growing veggies, making their own bacon and cheese, and farming bees. They both share a love of history, culture, and a profound interest in people's stories. Stephanie has worked as a historian and museologist at the Amathole Museum at Grens, which used to be in Williamstown. Stephanie, over to you, and we look forward to your presentation today.
Good morning, and thank you very much, Natalie, for the invitation and for the introduction, and to Alta for making all of this possible. And thank you so much for inviting me to talk about the Amathole Museum's genealogical holdings. It is always a privilege to speak to like-minded history enthusiasts. The aim of today's talk is to focus on the museum as a genealogical resource. By museum, I'm not only referring to the Amathole Museum, but also your local museum, your museum of choice, or even your heritage institution. If this presentation highlights nothing else, it is the vital role played by the volunteer in keeping museums vibrant and their collections growing and well looked after. We are recording this talk for later use and follow-up referencing, so please sit back and relax. The Amathole Museum traces its origins to 1884 and is the 6th oldest museum in South Africa. We focus on 3 research fields: anthropology, history, and terrestrial mammalogy. The history section focuses on local history, but with prominent strands reaching throughout the province, the country nationally, and even across the African continent. More about that later. We have been assisting clients with their genealogical inquiries since the 1960s. When I arrived at the museum in 1997, I found this red-eye cartoon strip on the notice board. I hope you are all enjoying it. In practice, we collect on anyone and anything with links to the town and surrounding areas. Genealogically speaking, we focus on the following areas. First of all, King Williamstown families. Secondly, the Cape Mounted Riflemen or the Frontier Armed and Mounted Police. Eastern Cape missionaries and missionary endeavors. And lastly, the German settlers. With your indulgence, I'd like to unpack each of these topics with you. The museum serves as the official repository for the Frontier Armed and Mounted Police and the Cape Mounted Riflemen, both imperial and colonial, dating from 1806 to 1926. King Williamstown served as headquarters of the colonial Cape Mounted Riflemen for most of its existence. Our holdings include nominal lists, an extensive collection of photographs, newsletters, and 3-dimensional objects. We also collect biographical information on all Eastern Cape missionaries. In the 1970s, when we started this collection, all South African missionaries working on the African continent were included. Since the late 1980s, mainly due to staff shortages, we have been focusing on the Eastern Cape exclusively. But the information on South African missionaries working in, for example, Sudan and Nigeria, for example, remains part of the collection. As a result, we have a wonderfully rich and largely unknown collection of missionary-related objects just waiting to be discovered. We also focus on the products of missionary work in the Eastern Cape. This is an image of St. Barnabas Mission, taken in 1894 at Nglaza, near present-day Ngcobo. And these are rare images of female missionaries from the Eastern Cape, a specific research interest of mine. Isabella Lang was the wife of Reverend James Lang of Burnshill and subsequently Lovedale, whilst the formidable Miss Elizabeth Storrock from Peelton is pictured in the middle. Peelton was the first girls' school in the Eastern Cape. Bella Ogilvie of Mgwali Mission was another pioneer missionary teacher who has not received sufficient attention in the existing historiography. I might just add that these images from our collection is not available anywhere else. I understand that our last focus area, the German settlers, is of interest to some of your members, and I therefore want to spend some time on them. Who were the German settlers? Between 1856 and 1859, some 4,000 German immigrants settled in the border area of the Eastern Cape. They arrived in the following groups: members of the British German Legion. They were the first group. They were recruited in Great Britain to fight in the Crimean War, but while still in training, the war ended. Great Britain was at a loss as to what to do with the newly recruited soldiers. Eventually, they decided to send the legionnaires to the Cape Colony. But as many of the men were unmarried, the British authorities actively encouraged a change of marital status. As a result, several mass marriages occurred on the eve of embarkation, often conducted on the ships themselves. This is a map which illustrates the geographical imprint of the Germans and why places such as Frankfurt, Braunschweig, Hanover, and Berlin now form part of the Eastern Cape milieu. The British German Legion was located in these newly created villages, arranged as lines of defense in case of war with the Xhosa. The second group of German settlers were largely peasant farmers and tradesmen who were attracted to the promise of land ownership. They also settled in the German villages. Some of the members of the British German Legion had abandoned their properties when they left to join the Imperial Army following the outbreak of the Indian Mutiny in 1858. German immigrants augmented the numbers of the original settlers from the early 1860s. Late 1870s, and again in 1883. I do not believe that we should exclusively focus on, for example, the 1820 British settlers or the 1857 to 1859 German settlers. There were, in fact, waves of successive groups of settlers, both government-sponsored and private groups, who immigrated to the Eastern Cape. And here is some blatant marketing for the museum. This is a commemorative booklet on the German settlers. We've sold out the first edition. This is the second edition in digital format or as a paperback for only 100 Rand per booklet, excluding postage. For further inquiries, my email address will be on the screen at the end of this presentation. The booklet formed part of the 2008 commemoration, and I've included the content so that you can have an idea of what exactly we were aiming to speak about. Here are some examples of earlier commemorations, also featuring the German Trudelwagen or block wagon. You can see the wagon there in two of the images. And here is the Trudelwagen, one of only two known to exist, on display in the Amathole Museum. When Natalie initially asked me to speak to you, I remembered 4 images in our collection of a Johannesburg congregation with German settler connections to the Eastern Cape. This is an image of the German Baptist congregation in Mayfair, Johannesburg. Several German settler families from the Eastern Cape moved to Johannesburg after the discovery of gold in 1886. Individuals on the photo are not identified, but using the local Baptist church records, which list church transfers, one can presume that the image probably includes some of the families listed on the slide that you can see in front of you. And here with the rest of the Mayfair images from our collection. On the left, you can see the congregants in front of the house of the Sell family. Their home was used for church services prior to the erection of the church. The church's foundation stone was laid in April 1897 by Captain Carl von Brandes. More about him later. At the bottom is the newly completed German Baptist Church in Mayfair. I've been in contact with Mark Latilla, a Johannesburg history enthusiast and developer of the website johannesburg1912.com. With assistance from Mark and Diana Steele of the Johannesburg Heritage Foundation, we were able to pinpoint the church's exact location as stand 347 in present-day 8th Street, Mayfair, which was demolished between 1934 and 1945. The church never really flourished, mainly due to lack of finances. This ties in with Franz Hauser's doctorate on the first German Baptist pastor, Reverend Carl Hugo Gucci. Howell states that the manse and chapel was sold early in the 20th century. The Arki family were German settlers who intermittently lived in Johannesburg from the late 1880s to the 1890s and were members of the Mayfair congregation. So because of this talk, I really got into this, as you can see. The reminiscences of their daughter, Frederica, are kept in the museum. Did not know about this previously, and record the hardships endured by the family. Her father, Johann Arki, worked on the mines whilst Frederica, then aged only 15, worked as a nanny for her father's employer. It was a harrowing experience, and Frederica was ill-treated by the family. She subsequently worked for a much kinder Mrs. Williams, whom she accompanied to Scotland. She was, however, incredibly homesick and returned on a solo journey, can you just imagine, to South Africa to be reunited with her family. The Arkis again traveled to Johannesburg. Her mother, sister, and Frederica, who you can see on the image there, now earned their keep by doing laundry for fellow miners. The laundry was transported using a small homemade wagon drawn by 2 large dogs. They returned to the Eastern Cape when Johann Arki had saved up sufficient funds to purchase a trading store in Berlin, near King Williamstown. Frederica subsequently married Friedrich Winkelmann, the son of a British legionnaire. I have mentioned Captain Carl von Brandes. People from Johannesburg will know a lot more about him than I do. He laid the stone of the German Baptist Church in Mayfair in April 1897. He was, in fact, another German settler, an ex-legionnaire, who did not stay in the Eastern Cape for long. He soon moved to the Free State and subsequently settled in Johannesburg, where he became the city's first mining commissioner and magistrate. It was probably in this capacity, as a senior government official, that he laid the church's foundation stone. But we can surmise that he probably felt a strong connection with the German congregation itself. His contribution to early Johannesburg is commemorated in the form of a statue in the Johannesburg CBD and in the naming of both Von Brandes and Commissioner Streets. But I digress. Now for the second part of my presentation. So now that you know where our genealogical focus areas lie, 2 questions remain. What genealogical information can you expect to find in the museum's genealogical databases? And what information can be found in our storerooms? So this is an image of the index of our genealogical database. Basically, its point of entry. On the left-hand side is the objects database. I've been reminded of this recently, but we're one of the old museums, which means that we are very object rich. So in the history collection alone, we have 80,000 objects, whilst anthropology curates about 4,000 objects. The mammals basically has 45. So you can do the sum. It's quite a large collection of objects. The photo collection consists of about 15,000 photographs. On the right is a list of our genealogical charts. The rest of this talk will focus on the development of these charts and exactly what it contains. Hopefully you will find this helpful for your genealogical research. We initially used a basic MS Access database. I think everyone started with that. Then upgraded to a custom-made interface developed by a volunteer. But each database had to still be searched separately, which was time-consuming, and because we now had more than 300,000 records, Access struggled to keep up. Luckily, we made daily backups because the system crashed more than once. In 2017, we purchased an InMagic database, which allowed for a simultaneous search of all the separate databases, generating a single report for any given search. With the migration of such a large amount of data from Access to InMagic, however, dates are, on occasion, excluded and therefore must be checked and the omissions inserted manually before we send it to clients. It is not perfect, but we are getting there. The new database makes provision for the insertion of individual thumbnail images for each object and can eventually be internet-based, making it possible for anyone, this is the dream, to search our databases at their convenience. I'm currently fundraising to digitize our photo collection and hope to install climate control for this precious collection as well. We started the database project in the 1990s with the town's burial register and surveys of the local cemeteries. In the 1980s, with the disruption of the German settlements due to the creation of the Ciskei, 2 volunteers, Miss C.M. Waters and Valma Meyer, it's always nice to remember the volunteers, systematically recorded the inscriptions on the cemetery stones. We then repeated the process with the King Williamstown Burial Register from 1865 to 1972. We had a wonderful typist here at the museum who inserted each record on the computer. Another volunteer, Anne Edgecombe, who's also done work for GGSA, completed cemetery surveys of many Eastern Cape cemeteries, and this information was also added to the database. There is no genealogist currently working at East London Museum, so we've taken that on as well. Colin Levy, another volunteer, has donated a copy of all his Eastern Cape cemetery records, which is very helpful. But I want to emphasize the role volunteers play and continue to play in assisting the museum with growing its genealogical databases. We also have a newspaper index. Again, volunteers painstakingly perused copies of the local newspapers lodged in the museum. We now have a biographical index for 3 local newspapers. More work, as you can see, however, needs to be done. The German settlers also feature. Our database entries consist of the British German Legion Register, shipping, and nominal lists. We were given access to the original membership records of the German Baptist Church in King Williamstown. Written in Gothic German, I had to learn to read, translate, and then document the entries. Incidentally, these are the records I used to identify the Mayfair congregants. The register's remarks column includes reasons for excommunication, which highlights how strictly church law were adhered to. Several excommunicated members were subsequently readmitted to full church membership. Local directories can be a valuable genealogical source. We've also added voters lists, a biographical index of the museum's map collection, title deeds for the town, Cape-mounted riflemen, newsletters, and photos. We also cross-reference donated family trees and specific publications rich in biographical details. We are currently adding the names of the King Williamstown residents for 1899. Marriage records. I've told you about the German mass marriages on the eve of embarkation. A proclamation was published listing the names of the brides and grooms. This has been included in our database, as well as some other marriage registers in our collection, including records from the local Hebrew synagogue, the Lutheran Missionary Marriage Register, the Stadtrein Presbyterian Church, the Anglo-German Church, and transcriptions of King Williamstown marriages from the Western Cape archives completed by the genealogist Anne Clarkson. I'm sure many of you know her. This is still a relatively small collection. There is a lot of space for improvement. And lastly, museum collections are a vital genealogical resource. Most of our collection has been donated to us. Once donated, we take responsibility for documentation and ongoing research. storage, and preventative conservation of the artifacts. The image of the storage area on your top right forms part of our new climate-controlled storeroom, sponsored by Lotto. It is extremely difficult to fundraise for storage, so we included storage in our funding proposal for a permanent struggle exhibition. Family Bibles often contain valuable genealogical information, and we have quite a large collection of Bibles in our collection with genealogical information. On the left is a copy of the naturalization papers of Julius Otto Tesmer, held in the museum collection, dated 1865, which included taking an oath of allegiance to Queen Victoria. On the right is an illuminated Lutheran confirmation certificate of Daniel Lenz, dated 1869. You'll just see from the document, it's absolutely beautiful. Maps can also be a vital genealogical resource. I used this 1895 map in my doctorate to pinpoint the residence of the Tembu King Ngangeliswe. I think you might find this interesting. The museum's large photograph collection contains many rare images, a visual tapestry of the past. On the left is an image of the Ball family, including Mrs. H.S. Ball of chutney fame, holding her baby on the left. She was born near King Williamstown, or Kongwe as its name is now, and was educated at the local girls' school. Her family, the Atkinses, sold their chutney locally. On the right is an image of the original settler, Michael Tessendorf, and his 10 sons. He had a total of 23 children from 2 wives. His second wife, Ernestina Kreklo, gave birth to 18 children. Diaries and personal memoirs are valuable genealogical sources. These are the narratives of Amelia Gropp. You can see that it's at the top there. It says it was written while she was living with her, I think, her daughter in Johannesburg. She was the wife of a legionnaire who wrote about her life whilst living in 1913. So it's at the end of her life. And lastly, some of my personal favorites in the museum collection. On the left is the framed door sign and Union Jack from the Cape Town home and surgery of Dr. Jane Waterston, an amazing woman. She was a missionary at Lovedale before becoming South Africa's first female doctor. And the middle is a rare copy of the Sir Harry Smith Medal awarded to Piet Jan Cornelis as an official declaration for bravery in the field during the 1850-53 war, also known as the War of Mlanyeni. Smith, at the time, was the governor of the Cape of Good Hope. The medal was found by a farmer in the 1950s whilst ploughing his field. On the right is an early example of German print, or in isiXhosa, amajamani. This head covering was worn by a German woman. The textile was originally manufactured in Great Britain, but has since become synonymous with Xhosa culture and is specifically worn by newly married women as a sign of their new status. And lastly, the proverbial wish list. You can help in several ways: by donating your family trees, preferably with Eastern Cape connections, to the museum. You can share any relevant directories containing Eastern Cape references with us so that we can include it in our database. I've told you about the Mayfair Baptist Church. If anyone is interested in working with me on this project, perhaps a short publication on the church and its members, I would be so grateful. Maybe in your branch newsletter. Thank you so much for listening to me. Here's my details. Thank you.
My question is, what are a few or one or two reasons why people were excommunicated from the church you were talking about earlier?
You were asking about excommunication.
Yes, you said that several members were excommunicated. I just wanted to know what sort of reasons were. Was it because they didn't go to church on Sunday, or what?
I think the reasons are often quite obscure now that we read them. It would say things like leaving the meeting without invitation. In other words, one would presume there was a fight, or the family left, or that kind of thing. There's also excommunicated because of sins of the flesh. Seriously, that's what it says. Um, Exactly. What does that mean?
Yes.
We're not very sure. There's also excommunicated because of relationship with an unbeliever.
Ooh.
Um, I had people helping me with this, and I think at the end of the day, one can only surmise what that actually mean. But you remember at the time it was incredibly strict. You could not have a relationship with a Lutheran or a Methodist so an unbeliever could just meant somebody that wasn't of the Baptist faith, because that was quite a popular one. Yeah, but there's quite a few of them. They were incredibly strict,
Yeah,
yeah.
they were. Thank you. That gives me a good idea of why they would have been excommunicated. And I was fascinated to hear about Mrs. Ball,
Yes.
and her chutney fame. I know that Joe Olsen Define is researching the Ball family, because it ties in with her mullahs from,
Really?
um, we were German settlers to here. And I just wondered if there was perhaps a connection there. Joe, you're going to have to write to Stephanie and check that out.
Absolutely. I remember at the time doing that research, there was a descendant, a grandson called Richard Ball, that was very useful. Um, he's the
Oh,
one
the
that connected up.
publisher.
Hmm?
Yeah, no, it is
Publisher.
our webmaster, Natalie. Richard, our
Uh,
webmaster is his grandmother.
really?
Really?
That's amazing.
I'm going to
Sure.
send you the photo. I took a
Yeah,
screenshot.
it's been a story that even Unilever, they are telling the incorrect story about her. So it's, even though my story has been all over the website and Facebook, how many times people keep on insisting on getting the story wrong.
Yeah.
Basic facts about the family's history. We have in our collection a chutney bottle that talks about Mrs. It's what would it's labeled as Mrs. Atkins colonial chutney manufacturer.
Oh,
So
that's
this is more
precious.
than making a few bottles for friends. Yeah, it's actually in our collection.
Stephanie, my great grandparents lived in King, and I just wanted to ask, why was King seems to have been a very big center in its time? What was the reason that it became such a big center, and why did it decline from being a big center?
It's one of the earlier settlements in that area, and it had a lot to do. There's various reasons for it, but one of the reasons definitely is because of trade with the Transkei. So it was like the last big stop before entering the Transkei. So there's a lot of trading happening between the hinterland of the Transkei, King Williamstown. East London was really just the harbor for King Williamstown
Right.
for many years. So
And then why did that decline? Because at some point they were forced to leave due to lack of work.
So by 1877, when the railway is moved in. Oh, and also the military played a big role in that. Because of the Cape Mounted Riflemen, the early, it was the headquarters for that. But by 1913, 1926, the military is moved out. So that happens as well. Then it's also the development of East London, which was normal if you think of the harbour being there. So a lot of big trading companies in King Williamstown itself opened offices in East London and eventually would close in King Williamstown, because what's the point of having two offices, and then base their main business premises in East London rather than King Williamstown. But the decision on the railway was also rather a big deal, because it was not the main entry point. The train literally had to reverse in what people said backward style into the town itself. So, you know, that was also not good. But with the development of the Sky, that whole homeland system, the town became more prominent until, of course, 1994. And now the capital of the Eastern Cape is now in Bishu, which is right next door to King Williamstown. But that was all a whole lot of politics as well, because the town should have been, King Williamstown should have been Bishu. So that's a whole story as well. These sort of twin towns that are really sitting next to each other. So yeah, it's quite a complicated history. It's been capital literally of different provinces 3 times. First of province of Queen Adelaide, which didn't exist for a long time, then British Kaffraria, and now with Bishu, it's the Eastern Cape province capital. There's a question from Desiree, if I might, just on the chat, says that does the museum hold any Catholic records? Absolutely, we do, and especially on the Catholic mission stations. In the Eastern Cape, most of the Catholic records the local ones are still with the church itself, and then there's also I've been there once in Port Elizabeth. That's also quite a good place to start. They have, it's sort of the area records. There'll be information there as well. The Dominican nuns all come from King Williamstown. That was their headquarters. In 1877, I spoke about the railway track. They were actually the first passengers that came to King Williamstown. I think there were about 7 nuns. And the Dominican nuns have literally gone all over Southern Africa, including Zimbabwe. And it all started in King Williamstown. Their records, incidentally, are all in Johannesburg now. There's another inquiry here. If I've done research on the Kirchhoff family, the founder of Seeds, I have not. I'm not sure if the Kirchhoffs are from the Eastern Cape German settlers, but anything is possible. So email me and we can chat about that and see what we can find out together.
All right. If there are no more questions, all that remains for me to do is say thank you so much, Stephanie. It was fascinating. I loved hearing all about the German settlers, all about the holdings in your fascinating museum. And I look forward to arranging a trip to the Jhb Branch of the Genealogical Society